Let the word go
The
forth.
challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a pioneering program called Challenge.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
That looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of shared values.
With something real.
60 years later, we examine our divisions, our connections, our shared pains and successes in a new program called Challenge 2.0. American religious leaders are becoming increasingly vocal in their opposition to federal seizures of alleged illegal immigrants and refugees. A leading Catholic biweekly newspaper asserted members of the faith must decide between loyalty to leaders supporting the raids or loyalty to the gospel. Lutheran churches have filed lawsuits against the Department of Homeland Security. An Episcopal Bishop told his clergy that it may be that now is no longer the time for statements, but for us with our bodies to stand between the powers of this world and the most vulnerable. In this episode of Challenge 2.0, 3 Seattle faith leaders discuss the ICE raids and tactics. Movie scenes of urban combat generally feature foreign cities, typically in third world countries. In the last 6 months, such urban combat scenes weren't part of a movie, and they weren't in third world countries. They were in major American cities, each featuring attacks on U.S. citizens by federal agents. A few examples. September 19, 2025, ICE agents fired 7 pepper spray projectiles at a Chicago Presbyterian minister. Minister David Black, who required medical care, reported the agents laughed as they opened fire. 1 month later, another ICE agent aimed his assault rifle at a 30-year-old teaching assistant named Marimar Martinez. The ICE agent was angered that Marimar warned other Chicago residents of an upcoming ICE raid. One agent bragged, "I fired 5 shots and she had 7 holes. Put that in your book, boys." Martinez surprisingly survived. 2 months later, 3,000 federal agents moved into Minneapolis. On January 7th, an ICE agent shot an unarmed mother named Renee Good in the head. When a physician offered to care for the critically wounded woman, an ICE agent angrily refused that offer, remarking, "I don't care."
I'm a physician.
Hey, listen, I understand.
17 days later, U.S. Border Patrol agents tackled, pepper sprayed, and then shot a 37-year-old Minneapolis intensive care nurse named Alex Preddy as he tried to protect another protester. He died from 10 gunshot wounds. The local medical examiner has ruled his shooting death a homicide.
What's wrong with you?
Well, we're very grateful to have with us as we discuss this very sensitive and foundational issue 3 wonderful guests who have been mainstays of the Seattle area faith community. First, I'd like to introduce and welcome Father Michael Ryan, who is the pastor of St. James Cathedral, retired, but I have a feeling that retired is not an accurate description of all the many things you're doing right now. Thank you so much for coming.
That would be accurate.
We have Pastor Joanne Enquist of Gethsemane Lutheran, and Pastor has been on the program before as we've talked about various issues with immigration and refugees. Joanne, thank you so much for coming today. And a face that's going to be very familiar is Pastor Terry Kylo, who is the Executive Director of Past Understanding, the same organization that I serve on the board and that is really the home place of this. So Terry, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for all your work.
I'm going to begin with I guess a personal question, and that is when you saw the video of the shooting of Renee Good in Minneapolis and then of Alex Preddy, what was your personal emotional response to that? Father Ryan, I might begin with you.
Well, it was gut-wrenching. I would say gut-wrenching. I was outraged and deeply disturbed to think that this could happen in a country where the rule of law has always, been the rule and the standard. And it seems like we've departed from that radically. And human life was at stake, and 2 important, beautiful human lives were snuffed out in a moment of outrage, of militaristic, response to people who had every right to be there. So it was deeply disturbing.
Joanne, what about you?
Yeah, I think
the personal piece of it was the familiarity of being in those places and doing the kind of work of accompaniment and standing alongside neighbors, and the abuse of power that took their lives just gutted me as well. And there's a further personal blend because my family comes from Minneapolis, right. And so those are familiar streets to me, and a place where I lived for some years. And I guess it became all the more personal because it was lived experience and familiar, and the horror, as you say, Father Ryan, of how the rule of law seems to have been abandoned in this moment.
And Terry, as you saw this, what came to mind, and I'd say to your heart also?
I felt immediately devastated, and it was like the gunshots hearing them went straight to my guts and went straight to my bones, and then the stance of the officers, their kind of macho stance in that moment, and at the murder of Alex Preddy, one of the ICE agents backed away from the scene and clapped twice. And then that in juxtaposition with Renee Good's voice, on the camera, Alex Preddy's desire to help a person who should not have been engaged at all off the ground, should not have been maced at all, him helping her off the ground, and in juxtaposition with the voices of the people witnessing this, and their voices crying out. And I have to say that is I feel that in my body, and I think many Americans do.
The very day that Alex Preddy was shot, the pastor at St. Thomas More Church in Minneapolis said, "I'm tired. Just when I think it can't get any worse, I'm proven wrong." And another pastor who knew of Preddy's reputation for kindness and gentleness in his work, both his personal being but also his work as an ICU nurse, told his congregation, "Don't pay any attention to the vilification from our national leaders." What does it say to you when faith leaders need to say that to their congregations, to the faithful? Whoever would like to address that.
Well, it says it's something radically wrong that we would have to say don't pay attention to the government because they've lost their credibility, and of course they have. I mean, the response from the government was to attack them, to describe them as assassins and terrorists, which couldn't have been further from the truth. And there was no time given to thinking how did this happen. It was this knee-jerk response, painted them as the villains, which of course they were anything but. And this from the highest people in our government, and so yes, we find ourselves having to say, don't pay attention to this. Listen to your conscience. Listen to your deeply held beliefs, not to what's coming out from these people who ought to be protecting our liberty and instead are standing in the way of it and depriving people of their most basic rights.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I do take from it at the same time is that I'm impressed with the number of faith leaders across traditions who have long stayed silent in the face of moments such as these and are speaking out readily in places where, I think no one is surprised when I, as pastor of Gethsemane Lutheran Church, stand up and speak this way, because it's been my sort of way of bringing gospel and community life together. But many congregations have not had that experience, but their faith leaders are saying, now we've gone into a whole new realm. Like this has advanced to a different degree, and we need to discuss it. So, as horrified as I am that we need it, I am heartened to hear my colleagues across traditions saying, this is not right. Our moral understanding, our beliefs, our basic humanity tells us this is not the way, and we must speak out against it.
I think if we were to look at any administration in the last 50 years, we would have seen a spokesperson come out and say, a terrible event has happened, we're going to launch a full investigation. And that sense of a full investigation of the shooting and whether or not civil rights were set aside, were in the incident, is based on the notion of rule of law and is based on the very foundation of this country and the Declaration of Independence, that all people are created equal. And the fact that they immediately came out with these dehumanizing statements, calling people radicals and terrorists, misconstruing the actual events that we can watch on the screen, tell us that we have an administration that is dedicated. They didn't just make a mistake here. They are dedicated to undermining the very notion of human beings made in the image of God, human beings made equal, of human rights. And what they also did in that moment was to give permission and further authorization to the agents in the field to behave the same way.
Right.
So this is not a simple mistake. This is not just, in my view, a knee-jerk reaction. This is part of a program, of an intention to undermine the very foundation of the social contract in this country. And that faith leaders are stepping up is wonderful, and many other leaders of different communities are stepping up right now, because we're going to have to, because we're not seeing that right now from our federal government.
People describing themselves as Christian nationalists, and I guess another word that I've heard used for it is nativist, excuse the shooting of Renee Good by pointing to her divorce, her change in sexual orientation, the fact that her children attended an elementary school that had what they called woke or social justice curriculum, and saying, well, this is somehow okay. What's your response to that?
Well, so what they're saying is that if we can dehumanize a person after a shooting, we can therefore justify any shooting. Number two, our Christian nationalist neighbors, and there's not a huge number of them, maybe 9-10% of the country are really dedicated to this. They want to create a pecking order in this country, a permanent pecking order by race and class and gender and religion. And what they forget, one of the things they forget is that above every person that was crucified in the Roman Empire was a post hoc and after the fact labeling of the person as a thief, as a rebel, when in fact that often wasn't the case at all. And that Christianity, Jesus himself was the victim of just this kind of violence. And we celebrate his resurrection every spring. But on the cross, he was dehumanized by the Roman Empire, and because he was supposedly a threat to the empire. They're doing to Renee Good and Alex Preddy what the Roman institution did to Jesus. That's not what Christianity should be about.
And Joanne, you had a colleague at Gethsemane that went back to Minneapolis. Share with us your perspectives on that.
Yeah, so my spouse is also a pastor at Gethsemane, and she was felt called when the invitation went out for clergy to accompany the religious leaders in Minneapolis as tensions were rising. And that was before Alex was killed, that weekend that they mobilized in an effort to sort of reclaim some of the learnings that we had of solidarity during civil rights age and the walk in Selma. One of the most important things to know is that the community is standing by its neighbors, so that the rhetoric of the government that says these are terrorists, these are folks who have been, sort of geared up to do violence or whatever, is completely untrue and evidenced on the scene. In fact, what do we learn from those moments? We learn that we need to be organized. We need to provide mutual aid for our neighbors. We need to not expect that they are unaffected in food and housing and work. And we need to be able to know our rights. I think that we need to take that seriously, that it is that moment in our world when, in fact, the call to follow, for me as a Christian, to follow Jesus on this way may, in fact, mean I have to lay down power, life, goods, all of it.
I want to come back to that in just a moment, but first, Father Ryan, I want to ask you, you have been at the cathedral sort of a foundation when there are troubling moments in the world, in the city of Seattle, and draw upon a very diverse area. When you heard those characterizations that were used to excuse the shooting of Renee Good, what was your reaction to that? What would you say to that?
Well, I felt that this was a moment where we should be standing up and speaking. There are conversations going on right now. Frankly, I think we're behind the eight ball in a sense. The time is now, or the time was yesterday, but there's still time. And the interfaith community, ecumenical community, we need to be out there and yes, protesting in some way or fashion, staking out the claim, making it clear to our congregations who we are and where we stand. The time is for us to mobilize, I do believe.
What would you say to your colleagues in the faith as to what they need to be doing right now? Whoever would like to tackle that first.
So I want to say that when a group is dehumanized, that is not only an attack on that group. That's an attack on the very basis of civil society, the social contract, the unity of human beings and human rights. In fact, in the Hebrew Scripture, it says that a time of slander is worse than death. Because the trust between all the groups, the trust within the community is gone, and everybody's afraid all the time. And so I believe we've been building up to this for quite some time. And that that we are, in fact, in a moment when people of good faith, people who believe that there is one humanity, people who believe in human rights, people who are committed to loving neighbor, are going to have to take risks that fit with Jesus' call to take up your cross and follow me. Taking up your cross and following Jesus does not mean that you want to get hurt. What it means is that, like Jesus, you're so committed to the notion of one creator that you see everyone as human, that you're so committed to love of neighbor as you love yourself that you're willing, when the moment is necessary, to risk yourself on behalf of humanity, to risk yourself on behalf of neighbor, and even on behalf of self. Because when we step back and we remain passive in a moment when our neighbor is being harmed, well, that also undermines our own humanity. And so I do believe that we are in a moment when, within the frame of the Christian faith, that people are going to be asked to take up their cross and to risk themselves with and for all of our siblings in this country, because we believe that there is one creator, and even those that are doing the bad stuff right now, to risk ourselves even for them. Because I believe many of those folk are also now hurting because they're participating in this kind of system. And so I think it is this time.
I think one of the pieces that comes to my mind is that, yes, we need to mobilize. We need to use every avenue available to us to help sound the call, whether that is out of a person's faith tradition or humanist, to say these very things, to amplify this word about how we are all in this together, and the actions against one will be ultimately against all, both in terms of that pecking order and in terms of the united fabric of human beings. And I would go beyond just humanity to the creation and to all of us. There will be many, many people like Renee Good and Alex Preddy, whose names we will never know, thankfully, because they won't be killed. But they are standing alongside their neighbor. I was not pleased with the immigration system under Joe Biden, under Barack Obama, under George Bush. I have not been pleased with the way our country has been working on this. This is not a partisan issue for me. It is political in the sense that it deals with the polis, the people.
Right.
And it is broken, and we need to do some work. Meanwhile, we organize to try and address those injustices. We meet the needs of our neighbors on the ground, and we do everything possible, not only to sustain those organizations, but to sustain ourselves. And so some have likened this to the reminders that this is not a marathon, it's a relay. And we need to move back and forth. We need to take our moments of break. We have to spend the time for ourselves to be centered, to be grounded. I'm often reminded of old Martin Luther, who said, the 16th century one, not the 20th century, who said, I pray every day for about an hour in the morning. Unless I'm very busy, then I pray 2 hours. And most people, of course, expect it to be, unless I'm very busy, then I don't have time for that. And the reality is, what's on the ground requires more and more and more focus and grounding and self-care, so that we can be there for our neighbors in whichever ways we're called, and probably in the many ways we're called at different times. So Father Ryan may not have the same role of calling for the faith communities to gather and doing this, but I know Father Ryan is in prayer for us, and I know that his successor and others are working together to maintain what we can for a public vigil. And there are others of us who are working day and night to be there privately with individuals.
Father Ryan, as you have people come to you at the cathedral or just even in other situations and say, what can I do, what should I do, and just express their sense of distress, what do you share with them?
Well, I think what I try to say is that we need to talk to each other. We need to realize, as others have said, this is not a partisan issue. It's a human issue and a Christian issue, of course. And this is something that can unite us at a time when we're quite divided in some politically, for instance. And nonetheless, we can find common ground, and we need to. So we need to listen to each other in prayerful conversation, in informing us ourselves and trying to avoid the extremes, to hold the center, if that's the proper way to put it, because there is a center here, and the center is, for Christians at least, it's the teaching of the gospel. And if we can't agree on that, then somehow we're not Christian. We're not pulling our weight at all. So I do think at a fractured time, this can be a unifying thing. Having said that, I think for any pastor who gets into the pulpit and expresses points of view on this and tries to give people guidance based in our tradition. There's always the realization for any kind of prophetic moment that you're going to be divisive. It's the nature of prophecy, I think. I worked with Archbishop Hunthausen for many years, and he because of his very public stances regarding especially nuclear arms and the arms buildup, he realized that he was supposed to be uniting this community, and yet, speaking out, he was dividing. People were falling on this side or that. And that was a painful thing for him. But he also realized that that is the burden of the prophet, or the person at least who is given the responsibility to speak the word. I don't like to think of myself as a prophet, but I know I've been called to preach the word. So I try, though, to get people to find the things we can agree on, because there's so much that unites us in terms of our faith that is underneath all of this, and can help us find a path through it.
And being sensitive to that humanity, which is what we're
Yes.
lacking right now in the beginning. I thank each of you so much for being a part of this conversation. There's so much more that we need to say and that we want to say, and so perhaps we can continue this conversation, but I'd like to thank each and every one of you for all that you have done and all that I know you're continuing to do. So thank you very much, and thank you each of you for joining us on this edition of Challenge 2.0.